what started out as, I would say, probably about 6 months of incredible friendship. And I always had really, really good friends. I was always blessed with good friends, but this was like otherworldly, just like soulmate type friendship, where everything was so heightened and beautiful and felt so validating and fun and enlightening all the time. It was so magical. And I had never been taught about the fact that that could be love bombing. I had never heard of that phrase in my life. And I just saw a few faces go, maybe I don't know what love bombing is. And it's funny that even though I was raised in a good home and had a really great education, nobody had ever said, you know, hey, abuse isn't just if somebody beats you up. And, you know, what may look like you have just found your best friend in the world or your soulmate could actually be phase one of a domestic violence situation, of a cultic situation, of a trafficking situation, of a bullying situation. The signs that I was seeing at first were actually step one of an abusive relationship. And when people talk about abusive relationships, you know, sometimes they use the analogy of a frog in a pot of boiling hot water, right? So, if he started acting the way that he did 2 years in when I first met him, of course I had the confidence, of course I had the, you know, fight in me to say, get away from me, you crazy person, right? Of course, most of us do, right? But that's the problem, that it didn't happen that way. It happened in the way of, you know, you put a frog in a pot of boiling hot water, it jumps out. Put it in lukewarm water, which is what happened, and you slowly turn it up. This is gross, and I'm vegan, so I really don't like this. It boils alive. So what I was seeing as safety and what was bonding me to this person in what I felt like was a healthy attachment, like any, you know, friendship, romantic relationship often begins in, was actually just there, designed in a way, maybe subconsciously, but still, to build that trust to later exploit. Well, the problem is that abuse, we know, happens in a cycle, and we know that there are things such as intermittent reward and punishment, whereby I was essentially being trained to believe when things were good, that this was baseline, right? My equilibrium is set up here. And when I misbehaved and things got bad, well, if I misbehaved again, it would get good again. So I was in control of my equilibrium, right? And I wasn't seeing, because I hadn't been educated on what intermittent reward and punishment looks like, that it's really just a tool, because my behavior shouldn't have changed, you know, whether I was being abused or not, right? But I wasn't aware. Looking back, it seems just wild, really, that somebody with confidence, with a good background, with intelligence, could fall into that. But the thing is that there are mechanisms that were going on inside my brain, survival mechanisms, that really have nothing to do with my intelligence or my upbringing. They have to do with the fact that my thinking part of my brain that I'm using right now to reason with you guys, that goes offline in moments of trauma, right? We know that. On fMRI scans, we know that your logical thinking brain is not lit up during trauma, or even sometimes recalling the trauma. So it wasn't a matter of what I was falling for or agreeing with or what, you know, it wasn't a matter of any of that. It was over time, because of the power imbalance, because of the abuse and intermittent reward and punishment, my brain was in such a state of fear that it could not even reason. It was just trying to find its equilibrium in every moment. And what can I do in this moment to stay safe, in this moment? And something called trauma bonding occurred. We look at people and we think that there's a cognitive issue. But what we're not looking at is that this is brain science, guys. This is something that happens in the brain during trauma that doesn't allow us to use our higher cognitive functions, right? So it's not a matter of us making decisions. It's a matter of there being something off in our brain because of what we've lived through that we have no control over. And when we fix that problem, we fix the behavior. It can literally happen to everyone. Now, certainly, there are groups of people who are largely disproportionately affected, and there is community trauma, and there is community-based violence, and there is racial inequality, there is gender inequality. There are things that are even beyond just the individual relationships that set up this resiliency to either be, you know, higher or lower, right? And we have to acknowledge that. While acknowledging that, we can't just say, this is a problem that those people deal with. This is a problem that all of us deal with. And none of us is immune, right? Because if we were immune, then it wouldn't be trauma. It would be something that we were always in control of. And by definition, trauma overwhelms our capacity to cope. You know, I knew that I was living in what felt like hell to me, but I didn't know that I wasn't the problem. So I felt like the suffering was me. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know that I was being abused. Because anytime I would fight back, it got a lot worse. And so subconsciously, I learned, well, don't do that. Things are better over here. And by the end of it, I really just thought I was going nuts, you know? And that happens to a lot of people, where they go, you mean there's a real reason for all this? You mean that it's not just me and I'm not just flawed? Sometimes the person who's surviving it just feels like, what is wrong with me? And that's often what I feel like living with trauma is like, because oftentimes we know what we want to do in the world and we can't execute it. And because we don't understand the brain science, and oftentimes because the helping professionals around us have not described that brain science to us, we end up just feeling broken. And so I felt like that a lot. Now, I'm fortunate to have had what's called a pre-trauma self, and I know a lot of people don't. A lot of people with early childhood trauma, they don't have that baseline. But what I do believe that they have from learning from those people is that they do know what they would like to feel like, ideally. And so if they can tap into that, whether it is from that angle or whether it's from the angle that I was in, which is if I can get back to X, Y, Z, right? It can feel, post-traumatic growth, as we discussed briefly earlier, can feel so incredibly beautiful and like such a homecoming and like such real strength, because not only do you have strength, but you have the type of strength that now really can't be taken because of what you had to do to get there. The night that was before I moved in with my next roommate, a couple years later, I had a seizure. And isn't that funny? I never had seizures before. The person who tortured me was my roommate, and then I'm gonna have a roommate again, and I had seizures. Well, no. Medical community, you just have epilepsy and it just gone undetected and it just came up right now. No, I don't think so. My mom said, no, I really don't think so. She's had no signs of this her entire life. Look at all the evidence that this is psychogenic. No, in fact, so much no, and we've given her a 2-hour EEG. Here's some pills, we're gonna overnight them to New York, and Marissa, you need to take these pills tomorrow. But if you ever wanna have kids, they can have cleft palates and holes in their spine. But take these pills starting tomorrow because you have epilepsy, we're positive. And my mom begged me to get a second opinion. And so I did. And I had a 48-hour ambulatory EEG. And they said, you know what? This happens all the time. They said, what you had are psychogenic seizures. And a lot of people who are misdiagnosed epileptic actually have the symptoms of lupus, of fibromyalgia, of chronic fatigue, of RA, most, most sort of autoimmune type physical illnesses, certainly migraine, certainly just full body pain everywhere, pretty much. Certainly gastrointestinal issues, just pretty much what you might think of. My hair was falling out. I had cystic acne. I was so hunched over that I looked like I had lost a few inches. My eyebrows, eyelashes falling out. Everything was just an absolute mess. And had I just gone into a medical doctor and said, hey, these are my symptoms, imagine all the things that I would have walked out with. Imagine the labels and imagine, the drugs that I would have been on. And I'm not saying that all labels and drugs are bad, but I'm saying in that situation, the right thing was to look at the trauma underneath it. And in most situations, that is the right thing. And we may need to have a diagnosis for a while, and we may need medications for a while. But to not look at the trauma underlying this is really doing everybody a disservice. It took me about 5 years to lose my complex PTSD diagnosis, and it took me about 3 years to lose my psychogenic non-epileptic seizure diagnosis. And I spent that time doing EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. I spent that time doing somatic experiencing. I spent that time doing sensory motor psychotherapy. And I spent that time doing a lot of mindfulness, yoga. I went to acting school at the time, and I never technically did drama therapy, but I did some drama and I did some therapy, so I sort of made it drama therapy. I journaled. I don't even draw or paint really, but I did. I would draw my trauma and do whatever I needed to do to express that story inside of me, right? I spent that time reconnecting with old friends, building new healthy relationships. I was told that something happened to me and that nothing's really wrong with me. It's just that something happened really, really bad. And it's not what's wrong with me, it's what happened to me, and I can heal. I was taught neuroplasticity. I was taught, even though you're an adult, the brain can rewire into adulthood. So there's really no need for you to live with these symptoms your whole life. And yeah, you may have a chemical imbalance. Sure, you absolutely may have a lot of chemical imbalances, but our brain is an experiential organ. And so we are taking in what's going on around us, and our chemicals are changed by that. But they can be changed again. And yeah, you might need this low-dose antidepressant for a while to keep you stable to do the work, but there's no need for you to be on this your entire life as if you're just going to suffer from depression endlessly. Well, come in every week, talk about your problems, and take this medicine, and I know it's not really working, but it's working a little bit, and your symptoms are a little bit better, and we'll just keep talking about your life as it is, and you're just gonna have to cope with this your entire life. Why was there such a dichotomy between how I was being treated and getting well, and how everyone around me was being treated? And then I started looking outside of my family and friends and classmates and colleagues and looking at people experiencing homelessness, people experiencing addiction, people in the prison system. And I started going, well, they all have stories too. Why are we just labeling people and telling them that everything is their fault and that there's no hope? There is hope. I've experienced it. I'm living proof of it. And now some people said, well, you may have had some intense trauma, but you had a good childhood. Well, then I found out, guess what? There's a whole field that agrees with me. This trauma studies field, they've helped people who've had severe childhood trauma. They've helped people who epigenetically have had trauma for generations working against them. They have helped people with the most severe symptoms. You would think that the mental health medical field would glom onto this trauma field and say, oh my gosh, we have got to get that information. What are these brain-body-based modalities? What is the literature behind this? How do we implement this? You would think, right? But they're not. And so I got pretty mad about this for about 10 minutes. And then I realized that it didn't really serve me or anybody else to stay that mad. And so then I said, fine, I'm going to volunteer with an organization that's doing something about this, right? And I found amazing organizations that were treating people in their area, right? Doing incredible trauma work. And then I found national organizations that were, anti-abuse organizations or mental health organizations, but I didn't find a national organization with trauma at the forefront. And it kind of upset me that we were putting domestic violence over here, and cults over here, and trafficking over here, and war veterans over here, and natural disasters over here, and alcoholism over here. And I thought, okay, fine, but we're all human, and this is a fact of life. Why don't we take down all these barriers and just go, the main issue here is trauma and how it affects the brain. And if helping professionals and the public understand it, and we shift how we respond to it as a society, then over time, trauma will be looked at like a broken leg. If I broke my leg when I'm 5, I go and I get a cast put on it. Maybe I'll go to some physical therapy, and by the time I'm 6 years old, maybe my leg will be normal. But we're a society of people walking around with legs that were broken when we're 5, and no one has properly treated them. And we're 50 and we're still limping, and we're running into each other because we're limping, and we're hurting other people because we're limping, and we're going, well, why is this a problem? Why are things getting worse? Well, we're not treating that brain properly. We are not acknowledging the trauma. So when I couldn't find this organization that was all about this, that was essentially doing the things that I thought had maybe been done would decrease my suffering and therefore everyone around me's suffering if it was applied to their situation, then I thought, all right, well, I gotta start one. So I started Healing Tree.